The movie starts off with a lonesome teenage girl named Adele, who doesn't have any friends and spends her days listening to country music. Due to her extreme insecurity, she has no interest in working, and is therefore a financial burden on her family. As she gets home, we learn that she lives with her pregnant mother, and her mother's lover. One day, her mother tells her that she got a letter from Adele's crazy Auntie Dora's lawyer, saying that her crazy aunt needs a caregiver, but Adele doesn't respond. Her mother also says that the aunt is rich, and that they're the only family she has, so she has to be nice and take care of Aunt Dora. The mother jokes about naming her unborn child Dory after Aunt Dora. Later that night, Adele catches her mother's lover peeping through her door whilst she was naked in her bathroom, and closes the door immediately. The next morning, she gets ready to leave for Aunt Dora's place, but before she leaves, she writes in her journal about how much she would pay the devil to get her out of here. On her way to Aunt Dora's place, Adele hears someone whisper her name, but when she turns around, she finds no one. Moments later, Adele arrives at a gigantic house. She sees a cat on the porch, and pets it before heading to the front door, where she picks up the key in a tiny hole. She unlocks the front door, and when she gets it, she calls for Aunt Dora. But the house is as quiet as a graveyard, and no one responds. She heads to the kitchen, and finds a list of things to pick up from the grocery store. It looks like Aunt Dora made the list before she even arrived. There are also a bunch of dirty dishes in the sink, so she rolls up her sleeves and begins to do the dishes. Just then, a bell rings from up the stairs, so Adele follows the direction of the sound. She walks up the stairs and calls for Aunt Dora again, but she still doesn't respond. As Adele approaches a room, the light by the door comes on, and she knocks on the door, but instead of giving her niece a reply, Aunt Dora slides a note under the door. Adele picks up the note, which reads, "Absolutely no house guests, keep the front door closed and please keep it quiet." Later on, Adele takes her things to her room, where she finds a creepy-looking doll on the bed. Here she finds a picture of a young Aunt Dora with a friend, and later puts it down. She suddenly hears a creaking sound from outside the room, and goes to check it out quietly. We can see Aunt Dora's feet as she walks away from under the door. The following day, we see Adele washing the inside of the tub, and after she's done, she sees a hairpin on the floor, and believes it's belonged to her aunt. Moments later, Adele fixes Aunt Dora's breakfast, sardines and crackers in a tray. She tries to start a conversation with the hope that Aunt Dora will eventually warm up to her, but
I found an old picture of you.
Just leave it there.
afterwards, she goes to the grocery store, and here she sees a woman her own age who really catches her eye. As soon as Adele gets home, she unpacks the things she got from the grocery store. She even bought the same fruit as the woman she had been staring at in the store. She stabs the fruit with a knife, picks one of the seeds and eats it, but it doesn't taste as good as she expected. Later on, Adele tells her mom that she hasn't seen Aunt Dora since she got to the house, but her mom doesn't want to hear that, and tells Adele to ask Aunt Dora to pay her in advance, because the baby vitamins she needs cost a leg and an arm. Aunt Dora then calls her, so she asks her if she can help her aunt with anything. She says it has been so long since she had seen her aunt, and that she almost forgot about the doll, but she gets the usual response, silence. Aunt Dora then slides a note under the door. In the note, Aunt Dora asks Adele to refill her prescription, and bring her fresh flowers every Sunday. After reading the note, Adele goes on to clean the house. When Adele goes back to her room, she finds a mirror, picks it up, and heads back to her aunt's room. She places the mirror beneath the door so that she can spy on her aunt. Adele then decides to take a walk, and passes by a fashion store, where she sees a pretty top that catches her attention. Up next, she enters a bar, but soon leaves after she finds a man staring at her. She hears the whisper of her name again, but this time, she just keeps walking. She enters another shop, and ends up running into the same girl she had been eyeing in the supermarket. And when she sees that Adele doesn't have enough cash with her, she offers to cover the bill. The girl named Beth tells Adele that she saw her staring the other day. They're chatting like they've known each other before, and Beth makes a joke about the street Adele lives on, and they both laugh about it. Later that night, Adele arrives home pretty late. On her way to her room, she passes by Aunt Dora's room, and the aunt tells Adele that she's late.
You're late.
Sorry, I...
Just go to bed.
The next morning, she hears the same cat she saw on the porch, and goes out to feed it with canned sardines. And just then, Beth shows up, and it looks like she is taking a jog. Adele ends up inviting Beth in after Beth says that she's dying of thirst. She gives Beth a glass of water, and Beth tries to get upstairs, but Adele tells her that she cannot, explaining that her aunt doesn't like having people over. Beth then goes into the basement, and turns the music player on. They try on some of Aunt Dora's old clothes, and Beth also ties a piece of scarf stylishly on Adele's head. Adele then explains that Aunt Dora doesn't leave the house or her room because she is agoraphobic. All of a sudden, they hear a bell, which means the aunt needs something. Adele takes Aunt Dora's meal upstairs, and Beth really wants to follow her and promise to be quiet. Adele keeps the tray on the floor, and runs back to the stairs where Beth is waiting. They both spy hoping that Aunt Dora comes out to pick her meal, but the only things they see are Aunt Dora's hands. Moments later, Adele and Beth are swimming and playing in a pool. After swimming, they're both changing in the locker room, and Adele likes the way Beth dresses. Adele says Beth has really nice things, and it seems like she is beginning to adopt some of Beth's behaviors and mannerisms. Later in the day, we see Adele trying on the blouse that caught her eyes from the other day. She considers buying the pretty top, but then changes her mind when she sees the price. While picking up groceries from the grocery store later that day, Adele plays a fast one and buys a cheaper variety of sardines and crackers for Aunt Dora. She keeps the change in a small paper bag. Later in the bar, Beth says she's spending her weekend at a friend's cottage by the lake, and also says that she has been doing these grave rubbings. Beth says that she found 2 graves the last time she went there, and asks Adele if she'd like to come, and Adele says she's not supposed to leave Aunt Dora alone. Beth tries to convince Adele to come along with her because it's just for a day, so Adele finally agrees. Adele and Beth stop at the pharmacy to pick up Aunt Dora's heart medication, and Beth takes Adele to the cheap drug section. Beth convinces her to buy a cheaper heart medication, because according to Beth, the only thing the pharmacy cares about is quick cash. They both go back to Adele's house and joke about a creepy ceramic doll in Adele's room, right when Beth drops it by mistake, and the doll breaks. They then hear a sound from Aunt Dora's room, and Adele thinks that they might have just woken Aunt Dora up. She asks Aunt Dora if she's okay, but she doesn't get a response. Later, Beth is curious what the aunt has been doing in her room, so Adele and Beth go back to Aunt Dora's doorstep with a mirror. Adele places the mirror beneath the door, and then all of a sudden,
Get her out of here!
the next day, Adele runs her daily routine and goes to Aunt Dora's doorstep. She apologizes for bringing Beth in and says it won't happen again. She also asks if she can get paid in advance, but her aunt replies she'll get paid next week as per their agreement. After hearing this, Adele picks up the box of cheap heart medication, and transfers it into Aunt Dora's medication container. She also steals more money from the paper bag, and puts it in her pocket. After taking Aunt Dora's meal up to her room, she tells Aunt Dora that she finished all her chores and is heading out soon. When she turns around, an open door catches her attention, so she goes into the room and finds a piece of neck jewelry. Adele puts the necklace on, and it turns out Aunt Dora used to do her makeup in this space, and then Adele takes the neck jewelry to her room. Suddenly, she hears the lock of the door click, and tries to open the door, but she realizes that it's locked. She thinks that it's Aunt Dora and says that it's not funny, but no one answers. When the door is unlocked again, she discovers the same hairpin that was found on her bathroom floor before. Moments later, Beth picks Adele up and they drive to the lake. Beth suddenly tells Adele that she had an abortion. She explains how she and her friend had sex with a man they saw on the lake, and how he knocked her pregnant. Throughout this time, Adele was daydreaming about making out with Beth. When Beth finishes her story, Adele assures Beth that men are pigs, and Beth jokes about how easy it is to place a collar on a pig. They later go to the graveyard that Beth was talking about earlier, and then they do grave rubbing. Later that night, Adele lays in the same bed as Beth, and a weird-looking sculpture catches her eye. The next morning, Adele wakes up with a moth on her forehead, but immediately taps it off. She calls Aunt Dora with Beth's landline. The phone rings, but no one answers. At the same time, we see Aunt Dora struggling with the cheap medication Adele got from the pharmacy. Without telling Beth, Adele returns to Aunt Dora's house with a cab. She pulls some flowers from the flower pot in front of the house, and as soon as she walks toward the house, we see an old lady in a rock chair behind her. Adele takes the flowers to Aunt Dora's room and knocks on the door, but she doesn't get a response. She also fixes Aunt Dora's meal and calls for her aunt, but she gets the same response. Adele then goes to her room and calls Beth, but Beth also doesn't answer. Later, she goes back to see if Aunt Dora has carried her food tray like she usually does, but it's still there. She picks up the flowers, and sees that they are withered. Now she starts to feel something is wrong, and is about to lose her cool, so fetches the spare keys and tries to unlock the door. She opens it slowly, and immediately, the smell of the room hits her like a bullet. Surprisingly, Aunt Dora is dead. She has been dead for hours. When Adele notices the drug bottle on the floor, she realizes she is to blame for her aunt's demise, and we can see regret in her eyes. But it disappears when she spots the ring on Aunt Dora's finger. Her motives are not clear, but she searches for jewelry in Aunt Dora's dresser. Adele then moves closer to Aunt Dora's lifeless body, and takes off the ring from Aunt Dora's finger. After stealing her aunt's valuables, Adele calls the police to carry Aunt Dora's body out. She's also still trying to reach Beth, but Beth is still not answering, so she ends up going to Beth's apartment. Adele knocks on the door, and drops a note and the ring she stole from Aunt Dora's lifeless body. When Beth comes out, Adele sees a naked guy lying in Beth's bed, and runs off heartbroken. Beth runs after her and when catches up, Adele tells Beth that she thought they were a ship, but Beth scoffs at the idea. When Beth returns to her apartment, she sees the ring and note Adele left by the door. She picks them up, and sees a note that says Adele is sorry for leaving without saying goodbye before, and Beth then puts on the ring. As soon as Adele gets home, she starts to cry. Following that, she goes in to steal more jewelry from Aunt Dora. Adele goes to a jewelry store, and sells the jewelry she stole from Aunt Dora to the worker there. When Adele goes back home, she hears the sound of a chair creaking, and sees a rocking chair behind a tree. But when she goes closer, it disappears. At home, she dresses up real nice. She is wearing the blouse she really wanted to buy before. Looks like she got it with some of the money she stole from Aunt Dora, and she also does her makeup and heads to the bar. With her new look, she goes seeking a man in the bar, so she can move on from Beth. They sit across from each other, but Adele gets distracted when she sees Beth behind him. Adele asks the man if he can see Beth, and the man looks but sees no one. At home, Adele goes back to her room, and finds the hairpin from the other day on her bed. Soon after, she is having a bath in the bathtub. Meanwhile, we see someone else in the house, right when the door closes shut, and the lights go off. She throws on a robe and goes downstairs to check it out. But then, she is shocked when she finds a drenched Beth standing motionless behind her. She moves to the kitchen and they sit across from each other, and the fruit from the other day is also on the table. Beth says she came to thank her for the ring, but she's acting very weird. Adele asks Beth if she's okay, but Beth says nothing. When Adele hears some noise upstairs, she goes to check when suddenly, the lights go off again, and she hears Aunt Dora's bell. Meanwhile, Beth is acting even stranger. She eats the rotten fruit on the table like an animal. Adele sees the same rocking chair she saw earlier moving on its own inside Aunt Dora's bedroom. When she gets downstairs, she meets the doors open, and thinks Beth has left. But when she turns around, she sees someone sitting in the rocking chair, but it's not Beth, it's Aunt Dora. Scared, she runs to the basement, and starts to hear whispers of her name. She sees someone coming down the stair, and it turns out to be Beth, who now possesses a monstrous figure. When she is walking closer to Adele, Adele hides under a bed. At this point, Adele is unable to go anywhere, and accepts her fate when she sees the creature walking closer to her. On the next scene, we see a girl Adele's age walk into Aunt Dora's house. When she gets in, she calls for Adele, and then goes upstairs. She knocks on the door of Adele's room, and we learn the girl's name is Dory, her sister. Adele now resembles an old woman, and she is much older than she appears. Dory continues knocking on the door, but Adele says nothing. To make it clear that this house is haunted, we see the same picture Adele found before, but this time Beth is in it, hinting that Beth is the ghost haunting Adele. This indicates that Beth and Aunt Dora were best friends, even though it's not explained how Beth died. Beth's ghost appears in Adele's life, so Adele can help Beth reunite with Aunt Dora by asking her to change the medication and leaving the aunt alone, resulting in her aunt's demise. But the story doesn't end there. Aunt Dora is still angry at her niece for killing her, so she decides to make Adele suffer the same fate as her, and becomes crazy.